All right, here I am once again I'm still in Chicago, and I'm now in the quieter confines of the lobby. It's a classic sort of hotel lobby. At one point, probably smoke-filled and soft conversations, but there's no loud pseudo-jazz music being piped in this morning. So, picking up on, I believe it's PPM number 16, originally written this day, the 28th of February, 2004. It's 10 years later, 28th of February, 2014. And backing up a little bit to the conclusion of the meditation from the 26th of February, which concluded with Heidegger and what is going to become an important aphorism propelling the work. Hermeneutics is destruction. Now, what is it that's being destroyed? Or how is that aphorism, what is it conveying? What is it suggesting? Well, you have to back up a little bit on 226 to beginning, where I talked about learning being the possibility of leaping beyond the tradition. So there's a disruption, I'm suggesting, with tradition, and with what I call the fixity of the social script's narration that assigns us roles. Right? So in the play or the drama of learning that I'm describing, there is a post-traditional narrative unfolding. Here, sitting across from me is actually the often mentioned Sam Rocha, so I might bring him in at some point to talk a little bit about what he calls the folkloric reversal, because I'm interested in how he might take up what I call the post-traditional move, beyond tradition. So perhaps after I read and comment a little bit, I'll turn or ask Sam to come and sit next to me here. But onward then, and the reason I backed up a little bit was because I'm going to pick up, I can already see, on capital D, German word, Destruktion. So let me just go ahead and start reading. The human condition of learning is a situation of destruction, that is, first and foremost, a response to the need to deconstruct or dismantle, abbau, the past as a petrified tradition that stifles, restrains growth. Being shines forth as an ongoing presencing with an excess that signifies the not yet. In learning, we become authentically related to this not yet. In learning, we are attuned to this not yet, which we discover in our seeking. Our inquiry emerges in this relationship, in our repose, where we are held out into the nothing. The nothing reposes us in our relational standing with beings, with the world and nature, all living things. We transcend in learning, but this does not entail a retreat or a flight within introspection. Our gaze is outer, it is alter. Our attention and interest is thus not on us, but on the other, autre. We encounter the autre with the nothing. The other with whom we are always in relation with and with whom we always encounter in a vivid and stirring manner with a heightened sense appears to us as emptiness, because this appearance exceeds us, happens beyond us, beyond what we are commonly calling the subject. Transcendence is the appearance of the autre in its alterity, and it's otherwise than we name with our own juridical voice. Learning is the situation of being shining forth, appearing as the alterity of the autre. In the learning situation, this willing and judging subject is caught and thrown outside of himself. The address of evocative speech delivers the tidings of being in the first question, and this saying silences the voice that already presumes to know. Learning is the response to the conjuring call of evocative speech, which intones us in the mode of possibility, which provokes because it prevents what appears as impossible. The conjuring magic of evocative speech is contra judicia, against judgment, the thinking that has arrived at a conclusion and has stopped. Learning is the thinking which is not yet and is not. Most thought-provoking is that we are not yet thinking, says Heidegger in one of his most provocative sayings. The saying of Wu I Wu strikes as the appearance of the impossible, impractical, not feasible, what cannot be done, thought, endured. Possibility appears as the impossible, for it provokes the self-certainty of the willing and judging subject. In creating the condition for the possibility of learning, the provocative tidings must dismantle the certainty of the juridical subject. When this subject is subjected to the alterity of the autre, he is addressed by what is not yet. The subject is taunted, and in this moment his judgment is abandoned, for his ground has been shaken, and he has been deprived of foundation. This confrontation is recognized as destruction, and this is why an abyss appears in the saying of the Wu I Wu. Abyssus, abusos, without busas, depth. Bottomless, profound, and unfathomable, primeval chaos. This strikes the subject as impossible, for one cannot endure in a relation with nothing, and must always be in a relation with something over which one can have mastery, can control, and dominate. To be with is a situation that has not yet confronted the willing, judging subject. The certainty, confidence, and ability to control, master, and dominate is faced with destruction when confronted with the profundity of being. The first questions bring the tidings of an originary relationship with the phenomena which appears, hides, reveals, conceals, and hides from us in our seeking. The response is decisive. Learning is the leap into this unforeseen mystery, this primeval chaos, the impossible, the letting go of judgment, the will not to will, the repose of the reposed, Gelassenheit. The hermeneutical situation itself, research, questionableness. And that's a quote from Heidegger, and that's how I end. Yes, that's how I end what is one of these interesting little jam session of writing meditations that I undertook for sure, where I was just sort of into the language, sort of letting it go, seeing where it takes us. Obviously, or not obviously, but clearly from reading this, what I was into was, and what was introduced. It's interesting how every day something new comes in. That's part of the experiment, but sort of the new term, a couple new terms. One was the German word Abbau, dismantle. It's a Heideggerian term, A-B-B-A-U, and the French word autre, A-U-T-R-E, the other. And so there was a sense in which I was playing with what then was quite fashionable, I can say, in the field, as I recall. There was a lot of work being done on Levinas, so I think I was sort of picking up on that zeitgeist of the field at the time, focusing on the autre. And in a way, too, I think what I was trying to focus on was, and was exploring, were certain elements of multicultural education that I was interested in, but certainly this gesture away from what's familiar. And in fact, just today, in the paper that I'm working on, I was writing about this too. This sense in which education is always inclined to domesticate what is unusual and strange. So, for example, the philosophical. And I likened what happens in a lot of the classes I teach with my students and their desire to domesticate as something akin to these gated resorts that are set up on these islands, you know, where they sort of domesticate a rather exotic place. And people go there and they feel like they've gone to this place and they've visited this place, when in fact where they've gone is to a gated, sort of domesticated part of that island, or wherever they've gone. And so too, what happens is that what is strange and unusual and outside, so exotic, the roots of exotic are exo, and exo means outside. What's outside isn't allowed to remain outside. I think this is the gesture I'm trying to make in the meditation today, is this sort of letting be of what is unusual and strange and outside in its outsideness. Right? And as much as possible trying to gesture towards what is unusual. And doing that seems to require that we are turned around and away from the binding hold of tradition, right? That sort of holds us, or wants to hold us back, or pulls us back to what's familiar, right? So that's why I talk about it as a post-traditional move. Thinking as a post-traditional move, in this sense. The ending of this meditation, the hermeneutical situation, itself research, questionableness. It's a fragment, right? Is sort of left there, and it is fragmented, and it has absolutely no bearing at this point directly on what I said. I just think that I put it on there just to push out the notion of Gelassenheit. Again, Gelassenheit being letting be and being released towards what's outside, and this is the force of this meditation. Talked about the leap again. We've already mentioned that, the leap of faith. It's sort of guardian notion that's going to come in, and it's already been brought in, and it will be repeated again and again and again. So the leap forward, so to speak, is the move that's made when one is sort of untethered, right? You're compelled to make that leap, the leap of faith into what is unforeseen, mysterious, which seems strange, and I even introduced something here, the primeval chaos. And recently, that makes more sense to me in the work that I'm doing on Nietzsche in Birth of Tragedy, the paper I'm presenting tonight. He calls the primal unity. I think that there is a family resemblance between primeval chaos and primal unity. So, yeah, that's from 2/28, last day of February 2004. And do you want to say something, Dr. Rocha, about very quickly, you have a couple minutes to say something about, so I'm going to bring Sam, the man, Rocha, in very quickly to say a couple words about, sit down, Sam.
It's your turn,
Yeah.
obviously.
Welcome, Sam.
Hi.
Okay, so I don't know if you overheard the meditation, but I was saying something about the leap beyond tradition.
Mm-hmm.
In a couple minutes, because I don't like that you see the counter there. I don't like to go beyond 20.
Okay.
Project you're working on,
Yeah.
and the folkloric reversal.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yep.
you're using that category
Yep.
still, although you're talking, but you're using the term
Folk
folk phenomenon.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, right? So if you hear me use the term post-traditional, I think you understand what I'm saying, which is sort of like the move away from the hold of the grip that tradition has on us. And I'm here thinking more in terms of what we bring to the text, perhaps, or something like that. How is the folkloric reversal, would you say, position in relationship to something like that?
Sure. I would say that there's two ways in which this sense of tradition, which I take to be the two senses of tradition that I think can be problematic, and that I think phenomenology in general, not just this particular approach I'm taking it specifically, but the general thrust of phenomenology ought to be sort of have an antagonistic relationship to it, and that would be, first of all, the sense of tradition as metaphysics. Um,
Right. Exactly.
This seems to me to be exactly a problematic case that phenomenology has consistently uh, been critical of, and been had difficult questions to pose to it, and raised it as a problem itself.
Right. Right.
However, I think right now that the metaphysical problem is, in some sense, compacted in the form of ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ideology is a very particular kind of metaphysics, but I think though it's not just the generic ontotheological problem or things like this. I think it's much more specific than that. And so what I'm interested in doing in what I call folk phenomenology, and what the folkloric reversal is about a return to things. And these things, I think, can seem at first glance to be precisely the kinds of things that someone like Heidegger was trying to avoid, because they may seem closer to maybe objects, Husserlian objects. But I give an account, I think, a very intuitive but simple, but also trifold account of things, and about the possibility of things within reality. And the whole point, though, is directed at precisely this problem of tradition, which is to say, what are the ways in which we can disclose reality without having that disclosure muddled or distorted by, in one sense, metaphysics, which is itself a problem, but I would say even more so nowadays by ideology. So one thing I sometimes use in, for instance, in classes is the distinction between ideas and issues. A lot of popular discourse now claims to be intellectual and talking about ideas, but in fact it's really just going through a number of issues. And this to me is precisely, it's an ideological discussion. It's not in fact a conceptual discussion or a philosophical discussion. Folk phenomenology is all about the return to the ideas as things, right? And that prevents us from falling into the sort of ideology of issues.
Right. And that's good, because then what we're referring to then is that the sort of originary force of the idea, right? That it's manifesting itself in the things, and in that case, our relationship to those things as bearing the originary force is quite different than if we're relating to these things from the point of view of issues, where there's already sort of like a prescripted orientation. And I think that's where we're in agreement, right? Because then the weight, what I'm calling the weight of tradition, is something like the foregrounded way in which we're already entering into a relationship. I mean, that's what metaphysics is doing as well. Right? It becomes a way of talking about things before we've even encountered them.
I think though there's also perhaps a sense of tradition, though, that emerges at the moment in which we get rid of these problematic traditions. And this is in some sense deeply within the guts of the folk phenomenology project. It's not simply to destroy tradition, but it's to destroy tradition for the sake of the sort of, in some sense, true traditions that actually live and have a place within which are nothing other than just reality itself. So, for instance, when we look at art, I think a lot of times we can find, even in music, an elevated, sort of scare quotes, elevated sense of tradition. But whenever we're able to reduce that art down to its expression, to the blues, to jazz, to soul, to things like that, I think we find that in fact, in the destruction of the tradition, a more natural and a more real tradition, in some sense, a more traditional non-tradition kind of emerges.
Right. So really, what the destruction is the destruction of a certain discourse or language or script, in terms of that distorts or stands in the way of our experiencing in a phenomenological way tradition insofar as it's the force of over time of the creation of certain things, right? So we can talk about the tradition of blues, and we can say, this is a certain kind of music that has been performed and that has been made over time, and so there's a tradition of the blues. But if we're pre-oriented in a certain way through certain discursive language and lenses, then we have a very difficult time experiencing the blues and the force of the blues. And so the reversal it's a very powerful term, because it really does talk about coming back to that originary force, right? And what that requires is a kind of deconstruction, because it's a deconstruction of these discourses. And in the specificity of the context that we're talking about, I mean, we are talking within the context of, educational research, educational theory, the ways in which people are oriented to think about the world specifically. And I think that's kind of where the context is for this work, and what is the impulse. Okay, so at this point we're being the world is the force of the bar is making its way into our videos. So maybe we'll do another one tomorrow. But this is now you've been introduced to Sam Rocha, and I refer to him often in these videos that I'm documenting as I return to the original writing. I have to give Sam a lot of credit, because he was a very careful reader of Being and Learning when it came out, and he has.
You should all read it, by the way.
Has been. Definitely someone who just continues to encourage the project, and to just, as he says, put it out there and say what one needs to say, and let be what it needs to be. I mean, that's the practice of a kind of Gelassenheit of writing, which is to say, if we're talking about a reversal, phenomenological, there's a way in which we can reverse back to the phenomenological and take the risk, the leap of just writing. And I think that if anything, what this project is trying to do is to demonstrate the force, the power of doing that. But it is a risky business, and perhaps what the moral of the story is, at least today, is that it's important to have comrades that are there to at least support the work. So, all right, that's it for today. Thank you for tuning in.